Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for everyone joining the panel today. My name is Kelly Kiedis Ogborn, and I am President and Chief Operating Officer at Advanced Rockets Corporation, which is an aerospace startup based in Southern California, and we specialize in air-breathing hypersonic rockets for routine space launch and defense applications. I am absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Ariah Tanner and Aaron Bonilla from Star Harbor as we discuss the importance of NASA's Artemis program, both in driving forward the next chapter of human space exploration, and especially with their goal of landing the first woman to walk on the moon in 2024, and then expanding to Mars from there. We are extremely fortunate to live in a time where the moon and Mars are no longer a wish, they are a fact. And while we still have a long way to go to build out the vision for the future of the space economy and interplanetary exploration, the Artemis program is really a critical stepping stone to achieving it. And this is through demonstrating new technical capabilities, solidifying partnerships, both commercial and government, and then really emboldening the next generation of space leaders. So the question that we all have to answer, as the broader space ecosystem, and particularly young girls interested in STEM, is how we can support and sustain its goals. And so I want to dive straight into the panel. I have so many questions for you guys, and I'm really excited about the discussion and to hear your perspectives. So as a good starting point, would you mind sharing your role within the space ecosystem, and then a little bit about how you got there and where you are today? And Ariah, we can start with you.
Okay. Hi there. As Kelly said, my name is Ariah Tanner. I'm CEO of a aerospace startup called Star Harbor Space Academy. And we are building a rather large campus for commercial spaceflight training and commercial industry R&D. Really, really excited about our coming plans, which we expect to be announcing here soon. How I got started is I have a degree in astrophysics. I was an aerospace engineer for a lot of years. I started at TRW, and then I transitioned to Northrop Grumman Space Technology. I worked on communication satellites and NASA JPL space telescopes and Mars sample return missions and fun stuff like that. And it was really through that activity and doing outreach to young women and girls primarily that I got dialed into the commercial space industry. Started volunteering for organizations like X Prize, got hired by Zero Gravity Corporation, and it's really just been a fun ride since then.
That's great.
Yeah. Awesome intro, Ariah. That's great. Well, I'm Aaron Bonilla. I'm the Vice President of Training Programs at Star Harbor. My background, it's a little bit of an unusual path to getting into aerospace. I actually started in fashion advertising. And at the time, I had an undergrad degree in graphic design, which is not what you would expect with where I am now. But at that time, there were no options for like people in design to go into aerospace. It just wasn't something that you were taught in school or anything like that. And so I was working in the online advertising agency, and I learned about an opportunity to do web design, graphic design type stuff at NASA headquarters. And I was like, I don't know if space is for me kind of thing. Maybe not. I'm not an engineer or scientist like most people were. But the opportunity came up and I decided to take it. And that took me on a whole other path in my career. And over the years working at headquarters, I ended up working in digital strategy, web security, design, interactive, did all kinds of interactive animations for educational outreach, just a whole bunch of different things. And then I made a decision to transition into spaceflight training. I'd been in the space world and I got a taste of what that might be. And I wanted to be on the ground training astronauts. So I went back to school and studied adventure education with a concentration in spaceflight training management. Yeah, it was as fun as it sounds.
Super fun.
A heck of a lot of fun. And in that time, I had an opportunity to help support a mission, an expedition to Everest Base Camp, I participated in a training program that got people experience feeling what suborbital spaceflight would feel like. And then most recently, Mariah and I actually participated in January of last year in the Sensoria Mars simulation mission, which was a 2-week simulation mission in the high seas habitat in Hawaii. And so I've managed to get my hands in a lot of areas. And then I joined on with the Star Harbor team to help develop all the space training programs in partnership with our EVP of training, astronaut Ron Guerin. So we're in a really unique spot right now to develop these futuristic, like the future of space training programs, and especially on how we can get more women in that and involved in it.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I love having the dichotomy of both of you, because you really have these divergent paths that led you to the same place. And really what you guys are trying to do with Star Harbor is kind of pulling all these different entities together to create something new and different, but also create a place where almost everyone can interact with space in different ways, which I just think is really fun and very necessary as the industry grows, because it's going to touch people's lives in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. So just thinking about your journeys and how you got to the space industry, and then really all of these new opportunities that are opening up, through what you guys are doing at Star Harbor and through Artemis, how do you think that we can better conduct outreach to young women and girls to really start to drive their interest in the industry and also engage in it?
Erin, you want to take this? Or?
Sure. Well, I'll go first. One of the areas. So, okay, typically when you hear about people wanting to get into aerospace or thinking about the Artemis missions, it's always STEM. And you might hear STEAM, the A in there. Mm-hmm. But most of the time it's STEM and emphasis on science and engineering. And that is good. We need that. We need a lot of that. But from my perspective, there's a lot of other things that we need, like education and the arts, entertainment, like making things like exciting enough for people to want to be involved in it. Yeah. And I know like that is an area that kind of comes home for me, because having worked in communications at NASA, it's very difficult to get the message to the right audiences. Like, yeah, you can megaphone it out to the world, but how do you really get down to the right communities of people and reach the people that you need to get to? And that, for me, is a huge area. And it involves reaching out to different industries. It involves teaching the educators in these fields to look to those communities. And so I think that there's a lot of people trying to do this right now. So I don't want to diminish. It's not that it isn't happening. It's just, I think that those are areas where we can really hone in and improve on.
Yeah. I really agree with everything that Erin said. And I think that there are a lot of digital and virtual opportunities and shows and ways to engage kids through screens, which is, a fabulous way to reach them. However, I would also say that there really is no substitute for in-person inspiration. Mm-hmm. There's such a difference in impact when you're able to be in the same room as, a group of young people or a group of young women or girls. And so I think as an industry and women who have, gotten to a certain position in the industry, I think it's really incumbent upon us to actually get into classrooms and get in front of groups of young women and just be in front of them and let them know that we are real people and not just existing on the screen, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I also come from a non-engineering science background. So I am a sociologist by academic training, which is interesting. And then found myself really selling these like radical science and innovation type projects to people. And Erin, to your point, it's really orienting the impact of something and how an audience is going to resonate with and whatnot. So I've done a lot of outreach to young women and speaking that are interested in getting into either, innovation, R&D, or space in particular. And it's the question I always get asked is about this like point, because everyone is excited about space, right? Like nobody is going to say that space isn't a cool industry, which makes it a really fun place to live, because you don't have to necessarily get the buy-in that people should pay attention to you, or pay attention to it rather. It's more just like, how can they get involved with it? And what I find really fun about where we are right now is that, there's this constant trend that's coming up about space being for everyone, really looking at it as more of like an ecosystem than an industry. And really by nature of its growth and goals, it's going to touch on a lot of these like space adjacent sectors and skills that are going to be increasingly relevant, especially with Artemis. When you look at the technical aspects they're doing, but they're also looking at, advancements in like spacesuits and textiles and fashion design, Aaron, like you were mentioning before. So if you could think creatively for a second, are there some of these skill sets that you see really budding on the horizon that are not necessarily known as like space industry skill sets, but are critical to where we're going and how we bring them into the fold?
So I would say that aside from having like a full complement of specializations and capabilities, on a team, I think probably one of the most important things that we can bring are decent communication skills. I don't think that this is something that people in general spend enough time learning, is truly how to communicate and how to hear one another, and not just listen to speak, right? And negotiation, like any team it's a constant process of negotiation. And I remember ages ago, I took this class in negotiation, being in business. And I remember the teacher saying, if everyone doesn't leave the negotiation just a little bit mad, then you didn't do your job. Right.
Wow, that's great. Yeah.
Except, and it certainly explains how the world is the way the world is. But I think if we actually want to create, space in the future that we all imagine, this, sort of Star Trek maybe versus Star Wars, not trying to be biased there.
I'm a Trekkie over a Star Wars person.
Sure. But this, collaborative world, where we're trying to really, sort of be our highest selves. Yeah. Then, we have to change how we negotiate. It's not about getting everything you possibly can out of every deal, but getting, what's appropriate and what will make each person in the deal happier. Because guess what? There's plenty out there. You don't have to like scrape every single penny out of every deal to survive. There's plenty out there, and we need to start adapting a different mindset, I would say. So communication and negotiation.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And that, that my mind immediately went back to education, which is similar. It's the same topic area. I remember when I was working at NASA headquarters, just near the end of working there, they started to implement science communication courses internally at NASA so that, oftentimes the budget that's created for a mission doesn't include comms in there. And so they expect the engineers and scientists that are working on the mission to share the message of what they're working on. And it's not that they aren't capable of it. It's just that many of them haven't been trained in that area or have experience in that area. And so what I found great when they started doing this is they started to provide those training opportunities to everyone at NASA running, especially, the PIs and project managers, those kinds of people, to have those skills so that even if their budget is tight on a particular project, they can still share the message. Because thinking about it from a funding perspective, like thinking about federal budgets and stuff like that, if the government or the public don't know what you're working on, you're not going to get funded. And so that's been a constant challenge in the years I had at NASA, and I'm sure it still is now, is how do you make sure that everybody knows what you're working on while still building the thing? And I think that's where the education, like internal training on like comms, but also teaching students, like young women, in school, yeah, you're into science. That's awesome. You're into engineering. That's awesome. Here's a class on how to communicate what you're working on, or build it into the courses that they're already doing so that it becomes natural when the time comes for them to share it.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I think a couple of years ago, there was I'm blanking on the publication now, but they were posting like the top 25 most marketable skills that are going to be necessary in 2025. And probably more than half of them were what people would consider soft skills, because they talk about it in schools that, when STEM became more of a thing, which phenomenal, right? We needed more kids to learn. It's amazing actually what's being taught in schools now. There's like third graders coding and doing like really cool things in building. Yeah. But they were talking about how as these were on the rise and more people were getting pushed into there's that interpretation piece of how to run a business, how to communicate a business, how to like keep the trains running, right? Where everything collaborates. And so it was interesting to see a lot of those like empathy and communications and like this strategy on the list of this technical type thing. And I used to do a lot of trainings around the country, helping companies that were pretty new to the space industry figure out how to position themselves for what it was going to become. And I always would put up this photo of the Mission Control Center after Apollo landed and like show it, right? And the orientation I would say is that like, this is what people are generally shown. They are shown the after effects, they're shown the excitement, but not the stepping stones to actually get you there. And you have to realize like beyond the engineers in the room and the astronauts, there's a cleaning crew, right? There's a tech crew. There were the fleet drivers that would have to like transport the actual parts back and forth. And so there was this whole village to make this happen, but that's the imagery that you see, right? You see the rocket landing on the moon in the control center, and not the messy, chaotic backbone. So what I always told young girls especially is that just like know what you're inherently good at, and there will be a place for you. It's just getting creative with it, right? If it's HR, if it's communications, if it's engineering, I mean, you can find these jobs because they're all relevant.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I say that a lot in other talks that I've given is like, if find what you're passionate about, if it's, and oftentimes I find myself talking to like that middle school age group. Yeah. Find the thing that you love and you're passionate about. And if you want to work in space, you'll be able to find a way to do that. It's just hone in on what you love first. And then you can plug it in, especially with Artemis, like it's such a big mission and there's so much that needs to be built and there's so much support that's going to be needed here to make that happen. And so there will be opportunities for everyone in every field. It's just honing in on what you're good at and then, plug yourself in and ask people like us, like people like us that have been in the industry for a long time. Ask them, so, okay, I do this. I'm really good at this, but I want to get into space. What would you suggest? Or is there someone else I can talk to? Which I think, I didn't know that early on, but then I figured it out and then started asking everybody.
Yeah, you kind of like, you find your way in. So we have a question from the chat that I'll read. So Sonia asked, how can she convince female students that STEM is relevant and inclusive?
Question.
And Mariah, you're probably getting up here.
It is a great question. And it's not an easy answer because, at the moment, it's not super inclusive, certainly I think it's getting better than when I was in school, way back in the 20th century.
Way back.
When I was one of very, very few women in my program, in fact, my class graduated 18, and there were 3 women that graduated my year, and that was like a banner year.
Wow.
When I went into engineering, in my department of 60, I think there were 4 or 5 women, so I mean, it's hard to say. And that's true. This is also true for racial diversity as well. You don't see a lot of diversity in engineering and a lot of sciences, not all of them, but certainly physics, this was true. And so I think right now there's given a lot of lip service to it, but they still don't see it, right? When you see a room full of engineers, it's still, generally
pale, male, and stale.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, I think it's up to those of us that do sort of represent some of that diversity and make sure that we are out there in front of people and they see it and know that it does exist and they won't be alone when they finish and know that we're still sort of blazing the trail right now and they're part of that solution is being willing to be one of the forerunners. I don't know how long we'll have to fight that fight. But it is improving.
Yeah, definitely. Back on what I was saying before, I would say all of these fields we need young women in them. But as Mariah just said, it's a little bit of an uphill battle still, but there's so many women that are already in leadership positions that have a huge career under their belt. And I think, being comfortable to reach out to those people or find communities of women in engineering, women in STEM or STEAM fields, and, just try to plug in and don't be afraid to ask those questions. But I think from an educator's perspective, it's just relaying that message and showing young women that there is a community out there, even though it looks like there isn't. Yeah. And so even if you are the one woman in the room in a meeting, there are other women like you doing the same thing. They're just in other meetings. Yeah. And so you can find them. And now online, you can find anybody. So it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember, and this sort of goes back to find what you're passionate about and figure out how you fit into an industry. So when I first started working at DARPA, I was pretty young. I was in my early 20s, and I was very intimidated by the fact that I was going there and supporting the director, and very aware that I was around very accomplished, smart, scientific people. And I remember I tried to mold myself to be what I envisioned somebody in my role being. I was their congressional liaison. And so I was like, okay, well, this is what I'm supposed to act like. And I actually wasn't as effective because I wasn't being my authentic self. And part of my personality plays into my business and kind of everything else. And I remember it wasn't until I realized that, it was a couple years later, and with some, years under my belt, my late 20s, you gain some wisdom that you don't have in your early 20s in some way, right? And once I really stepped into that, I was a lot more effective. And I also realized that my colleagues respected me because of my work. And it was funny because I always wear pocket squares or things, right? Just a little bit of flair. And I had this really scientists walk by, they're like, that's an interesting pocket square. I was like, well, thank you. And nobody cared, right, that I was being my authentic self because I was doing my job. But it was I had to overcome it. And it was this imposter syndrome. It was this battle. And now I've sort of stepped into it because I've been doing it for 14 years, being in science and tech and especially space. But it was this evolution that was just really hard for me to mentally get over at first.
Yeah. Well, wait till you hit your 40s and then you can fly.
I'm 37 now and I'm just I'm good. I don't need
I went through something similar in my early days at NASA because, coming from a design perspective and not a science or engineering one, I always felt like I had to prove something to someone. Yes. I was not as valuable as the PhD that I was talking to or the astronaut that I was talking to at the time. But it took time and it took other women mentors that came into my life to help me realize that that none of that's real. It's all made up. And I can decide who I am and who I want to be in the industry. And if I'm a little weird, that's okay. If I don't fit into the box, that's cool. It's part of who I am, and people, if they want to be around that, great. If they don't, it works itself out because you find your niche, your place within the industry.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say too that in some places that's an asset.
Yeah.
We're all a little weird. Like,
Yeah.
you gotta have to be to do the stuff that we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
I have found though that the women, Erin, you were talking about, there's these really amazing, credible women that are top of their field. I mean, like Pam Milroy at NASA, and one of my former colleagues is now the new DARPA director. But they're super authentic. Like the ones that I see that rise to the top are really humble and really credible, but really authentic. And they've really just they haven't forgotten who they are in the climb, which I think is really important.
That's great.
Yeah. Or I noticed, in my engineering days, as a young female engineer, I did not get a lot of support from the women ahead of me. And I think there's a different sort of generational phenomenon. It was like they struggled, and so like you're on your own too, kid, kind of attitude. I think that's changing. I think I'm in my late 40s, and I know certainly for the women that I was engineering with, we all went out of our way to try and mentor the women behind us and really support the women coming up behind us, and I think that we're seeing more and more of that, especially with all of the sort of consciousness around women and just sort of females in the working place. That's all shifting, and I think there's a lot more willingness on behalf of the older women to take younger girls under their wing than we've ever seen before, and I think that's really awesome.
Yeah.
I agree that. Well, that actually leads into one of my next questions perfectly. But what do you think are the greatest opportunities that we have now to really pave the way for future generations?
Well, I'll go first.
Videos, and like technology has really expanded it. Any other things in mind?
Well, thinking about opportunity to provide opportunity for the younger young women that are coming up in industry now. Some of the things that I didn't take advantage of when I was younger were internship opportunities. I think there's so much access to that now. Like there are all kinds of fellowship, like Brooke Owens Fellowship is one of them. I wrote them down. Patty Grace Smith Fellowship. Like there's a whole bunch out there right now where you can apply and then get internships with financial support to work at commercial space companies. But then there's also NASA internship opportunities. Every season, pretty much, they put out new opportunities to work at their different centers. And so I think being able to support the industry that way, showing people where they can apply to these internships, because it's never quite as straightforward. Like you can search for internship in a certain field, robotics, let's say, in aerospace, and it's not clear where you need to go to apply for that or get that opportunity. But there are a lot of groups out there trying to make that more accessible and more organized. The other thing that comes to mind, and specifically because, Mariah and I both have participated in these, but space analog missions, there's a lot of opportunity and it's bubbling more. There's going to be more coming. And what those are, it's like space simulation missions or research opportunities.
I've always been intrigued by those.
Yes, they're great.
It's been on my to-do to look into them more. So I want to hear about it.
Yeah. So really, there's so many different versions of what that is. So basically, a space analog activity is anything that simulates space in some way, or the impacts of space on the human body or a research project. And so there's a lot of these, specifically these simulation missions that happen. There are a lot of them located around the world, and in the U.S., there's the high seas habitat that Mariah and I lived in. That's located in Hawaii on the Big Island, and it's basically a dome structure on the side of a volcano to simulate what life would be like on Mars. Yeah, pretty amazing.
It's pretty convincing.
It is. Once you're there and you're in the mentality of the simulation, you really do forget that you're like on Earth, and there's civilization right down the road, because that location in particular, you can see like volcanic terrain, and that's about it. And another volcano on the other side. So it really puts you in the mode of the simulation. And then there is like other opportunities like the Mars Desert Research Station, which is in Utah. The Lunaris habitat is in Poland. And all of these, and actually NASA has the Hera habitat, Human Exploration Research Analog, Hera. And actually one thing that's really cool is that's located inside a high base space at Johnson Space Center. You can just go on their website and like email the person and say, hey, I want to be a part of an analog mission that's happening in Hera. And you have to send your resume, and like they have certain requirements that they're looking for. But it's not in an organized place where you can like find all of this, like the community is bubbling right now and they're trying to get more organized, but like it's a little difficult to find them. So that, but again, you can come to people like us, like look to the women in the industry to point you to those, because there's so much out there and it's all in here, but we can help.
Well, welcome anew. Hi.
Hey.
Hello. I'm glad you could join us. No, Erin, I think that's a wonderful suggestion, because like you said, it's they're looking for all different types of people to join into these. And it's really like, why not just take your shot? It's not like you necessarily have to have a certain experience or education in something, right? Because they're trying to be diverse, and that would be a really good entrance point and a very unique experience that not a lot of people have had.
Yeah. And one thing that's great about these missions is you don't necessarily have to be the one living in them. Like if you have a research project that you want to happen, you're using this Mars simulation and you want to conduct research in it, you can propose that research, and then other people inside the mission can conduct it for you. And so, we did that on our mission in High Seas. We were able to coordinate with Embry-Riddle to do a whole experiment with some of their students, and conduct that research and then provide them the data afterwards. So there's so much opportunity around them. So not just, and like learning how to be on mission control. Some of them allow you to step in and sit on mission control and learn from that, ground operations perspective. So just, that's why I bring it up, because it had a big impact on me, and I just did it last year, and I'm at this phase in my career. So
I love that.
I would say, it's hard to predict what opportunities are going to turn up. Because there's so much being created, as we speak. But I would say that a strategy that's always been very powerful for me, and I always recommend, is make yourself of service. Opportunities show up all over the place when you are turning out to be of service. So, for example, it was because I was out speaking to young people about the Mars rover missions in the early 2000s that I met the folks who were organizing X Prize. Right. And I got to volunteer with the X Prize organization, and, was there when Scaled Composites won. And, it was really a historic moment to be part of. And then through that, I was introduced to the zero gravity folks, and so, it was just like one thing led to another, but it was all centered in, being out there and trying to be a contribution rather than trying to get something out of it.
That's interesting. Well, so she works for State of. I'm so glad you were able to join us today.
Thank you so much. I was in the Crypto for Kids session moderating, and then this is something that I was super passionate about. Kelly and I were in another session during the Mother's Day Summit, and we had said for sure we're going to make a focus on Project Artemis, and we're going to continue this conversation because there's so much that we don't know.
Yeah.
And every summit going forward for Amplifying Her Voice, we're going to have a feature on Project Artemis, because there's a large number of women and girls that would love to support this, don't know enough about it, don't know where to start. Like, everyone wants to see this happen, and there's a lot of men too that want to participate. We just don't know much about it. So Kelly was so amazing for contacting me and saying, what's going on? Are we going to do it? Let's do it. And so we're here now. And now there's more people, and we just hope to keep amplifying this conversation, because ultimately the goal, I think it was 2024, Kelly, for Artemis, and we're already at 20, like I want to say we're at 2022, like we've got 6 months, right?
Practically.
It's coming up.
So my whole thing is how do we make this proactive, and how do we start to move the needle? What do we need to do, and how can we support your efforts?
Yeah. Well, and what's been fun about the discussion is that Erin and Mariah both come from different paths to get into the space industry. And so it's fun because there's the engineering path and then the non-traditional path through fashion design and comms. And so we've covered a lot of interesting avenues, from like imposter syndrome to how do you break in and where are those opportunities. And Anu, what I would love from your perspective, so we were just touching on, how can we support future generations, right? Just through access and information. And State of Women has a really large reach, both domestically and globally. So are there any resources that you can point to, or things that you guys have done to just try to pull women into the conversation, specifically around space?
Specifically around space, we've just recently, like since March 8th is when we had our initial, like, let's have a panel on space, and it was Christina Korp. We had her talk with like 5 or 6 other women talk space. What was it? The Space Foundation. We had Space Hipsters, another group. A bunch of different groups that came together and said, okay, we want to support this. We also had a woman who trained astronauts, like she was a flight engineer, like by training. And so just initially it was the conversation. And then the next summit, we had Shelley Brunswick help us with a whole day. And now it's become like another whole day.
Awesome.
Tomorrow, we're going to have a whole day around getting more women in the space industry. What are men doing to support us, help us? So there's a whole range of panels. So for the most part, it's the education, which is number one. And now these educational conversations are leading up to what initiatives are already out there. And then we'll start to partner and mobilize. The one thing that I will say that we're doing is this conference that we're holding right now is all being recorded, as was the one before and the one before. And eventually we're going to convert all of these videos into audio podcasts. And Sheconomy, which is our for-profit, Sheconomy has mobile apps on Android, iOS, and KaiOS. And KaiOS works on $20 mobile phones, which are being used by the bottom billion, right? People living on $2 a day. So whatever you guys are sharing today, just know that there's people out there that have never gotten this information, and we want to get it to them, and they will listen, learn, and earn tokens. So this conversation that you're having is not only going to educate them, but it's also going to empower them economically. So that's what we're doing.
That's outstanding.
Thank you. So and if there's causes like Artemis causes where we say, look, we want to accept tokens to fund women going into space, then this is something that we can totally have a conversation around. But we don't know who to talk to, and there's still ways to navigate, but we're just getting started.
Great.
That's super exciting.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk a little bit about Star Harbor, because you guys are doing such cool stuff. And it really is this great culmination of all the things we've been talking about in terms of like I said before, like disparate industries coming together, skill sets, you have an R&D component, you have a training component. But I'd love to know where you see Star Harbor really bringing the broadest impact and opportunity to the space industry and for people to get involved. And then also where your greatest challenges lie.
Well, Erin, you want to talk about the opportunities and I'll talk about the challenges?
Well, sure. I mean, we are working in a unique area where we're at that cross section of commercial astronaut training and R&D opportunities. So R&D capabilities, access to the equipment that would be used for space training that is very difficult to access. And so we're working to develop a very collaborative environment. So there's no like this company is competition with this company, although they can be in competition, but we want to make sure that our campus is a place where people can come if they're individuals, researchers, students, small businesses, large businesses, get them all working in the same environment on the same equipment. And then that provides a unique opportunity for collaboration, things that can come of that. When you get everyone in the same room, then, there's a lot that can come from there. So for us, it's finding, and I'll say it's also a challenge. It's both an opportunity and a challenge is how do we make sure that we're really bridging that gap? So we can talk about it all day, but how do we make sure that we're really helping those groups talk to each other and work together? And then providing access, like getting everyone in there using that equipment. So, those are things to come, as we continue and build out the full campus. But that's both opportunity and challenge.
I'll add a little bit more to that too, is that, we're trying to touch, really every level of education and opportunity, like there's the K through 12 and just the inspiration piece, but then we're also, taking on like workforce development, really working with, a few target organizations that are focused on, jobs of the future, figuring out what those are going to look like, and then creating the skill sets, for those folks so that, the industry employers can find them and we have adequate capability, here at home to, to employ them and get the industry where it wants to be. And then of course, all the space flight stuff and the certificate programs and whatnot that we're anticipating. So we're hoping to really, fill in all the gaps as much as possible. And that's exciting. But challenges, one of the things that I being very just real with you, there's a lot of challenges in this industry overall. When you're trying to create something big and extraordinary and that's truly never been done before, that comes with a lot of challenges, especially when you're out in the VC market or private equity market and you're looking for big sums of money. Our entire project is about $600 million, so it's a good chunk of change, and, when you're out there looking for capital like that, one of the challenges is that, they want proof of concept, they want to know, is this going to work? Prove it. And when it's literally never been done before, it's a pretty daunting task to give them what it is that they need in the language that they need it in general. And then you add to that that somewhere, depending on whose statistics you listen to, something like 2 to 6% of venture capital goes to female-led startups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an atrocious statistic, and so you pile that onto something that's already challenging, and it's been a slog, and I think we probably had to do a lot more with a lot less, but we've gotten through it, and we're extremely excited to be where we're at, but yeah, that's very much a real world challenge right now.
Yeah, I intimately feel that in my soul, especially with this going after the capital raise for our rocket development, because people, we have it broken down into phases. It's very much tagged to the technology, but our design is very different. And it's I had an interesting call with an investor last week, and I appreciated his understanding of the orientation, because he asked me, he's like, so how many of explosions have you had, Jet? And I was like, but I appreciate that that in order to, especially with a rocket, right? In order to push the boundaries of actually achieving what's going to be impactful, you got to blow some stuff up.
Blow some stuff up.
Blow a lot of stuff up. You're going to kind of rejigger your path and figure out the best way forward. So I laughed, but I was like, thank you for understanding that it's not linear, especially when you're trying to do something very different. And the female VC statistic I also find interesting, because I've even noticed the way that I'm spoken to differently in meetings, and kind of jokes on them because I'm super aggressive and like and very direct. So sometimes I'll let folks talk, and at the end, I don't think they're expecting me to either like, come at them with the facts or whatnot. And but it's a really interesting dichotomy. And even the questions I've seen myself get asked versus like other male colleagues, I feel like sometimes women need to, Erin, this is your kind of point earlier, like prove that why you're there. Right. And sometimes we do that to ourselves, but there's oftentimes questions that it's like the proof is for you to establish why you're credible. And it's like, dude, we're credible because we know what we're doing. Right. But it's this weird psychology thing.
I had this was a few years ago now, but I remember in one meeting, I had this gentleman who was potentially interested in investing. It was a development partner say, well, I won't bore you with the numbers. And
you're like, I know the numbers.
This is about a potential deal. These were the numbers of the deal, right? And I was like, well, first of all, I'm an astrophysicist. I'm good with numbers. Second, I'm CEO. The numbers are my job. So please bore me with the numbers. Unfortunately, investors of any flavor like confidence, and confidence often comes from familiarity, right? And every deal that they've ever made has been with people who generally look like them, which is to say, middle-aged, white men typically, and that's where the majority of the capital goes. And so, it's a bit of a job, and this is not about what's fair; it's just about what is, right? We have to, show that, we are competent and capable, and that their investment is in good hands.
Right.
I do think it takes us a little bit more because we have to overcome that sort of initial unconscious bias, but it can be done. It's just more challenging than maybe some other folks would have.
Mariah and Kelly, tomorrow at 1 p.m. we're doing Investing in Space for Humanity. So both of you should join if you're free at that time. And one of the goals that we set during the Mother's Day Summit was to do an Investing in Space roundtable where we bring women who are, got aerospace ventures. And there's a number of investors saying we would love to see more deals. We don't see enough women. So this is for the next quarter, like when we do our next Amplifying Her Voice, this will be our 4th summit this year. We're getting the hang of this platform, and we just built a new one. And I would love to reconnect with all of you so that we can plan something where we actually bring investors who are ready to talk about, what it's going to take. I used to be in the private equity space. I was
no kidding.
On the other side with the institutionals and family offices. So it'd be definitely like something that we can highlight and not, usually seen. I mean, it's for certain types of deals. So I think we're looking forward to having you back again in the fall.
That'd be great.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
That'd be really fun. Well, our time is almost wrapping up. This conversation's been so fun. I feel like we could jab on all day. I think my parting question, which we did touch on it a little bit, but are there any additional resources that come to mind? You mentioned, internships and a lot of the missions, but anything else where you could just direct, girls and young women to get involved? Or
I would. This might sound funny, and I don't mean it to be a business plug necessarily for LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is extraordinary. It truly is. And if I see anybody, any young people, but young women in particular, like looking to reach out to me, I will always connect. And I think that look, you have nothing to lose by trying to connect. All that's going to happen is you're going to get ignored. Okay, you move on to the next one.
Yeah.
But you never know when somebody might actually respond, and you don't know what that opportunity is going to be. And there's just so many incredible people on LinkedIn that are there because they're trying to connect. So
yeah. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I have made so many great connections that have influenced my research in my master's and other, basically my career to this point, because of putting myself out there and reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn, because that was the way to get to them. At the time, I wasn't thinking about it as the platform is what's helping me, but it is a very good platform for that type of networking. And as Mariah said, like, if you can connect, like, shoot big, like, you want that CEO of that company, like, write them a message. You don't have to just hit connect, like, write them a message and tell them why you're writing them and why you want to connect. And like, that's how you resonate. Because then there's a person behind there and not just somebody that's like clicking a button.
Yeah, I have to emphasize what Erin just said. If I get a random connect, I may or may not respond to that. But if there's a message, and somebody's like, hey, I'm just starting out and looking for advice, or, I will take 5 minutes and respond to that for sure.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's going to come out of it.
Well, I'm glad that you guys also emphasize the message piece, because I always advise at least younger folks, because it can be very intimidating, because it really is that mental block of doing it. But I told them, like, you never want to just send a message that says, like, I want to pick your brain. I mean, you have to be very specific, because people do, they only have a limited amount of time in the day, especially if you're in certain positions. So even like with emails, you pick and choose which are the most important, which messages are. So I'm like, as specific as you can be in the subject line. And then if you can be really specific in the message and actually talk about, like, this is the information I'd love to know, or could you introduce me to X, Y, and Z? People can assess, one, how long it's going to take them to do that. And two, if they are able to do it or pass you on to someone else. And you get more of a response that way, as opposed to a generic, like, hey, in the subject line, and then can I pick your brain? And you're like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like
take a long time.
It sounds like work. I don't know.
Work. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to be an hour conversation or if I could just direct you somewhere. So I'm glad you guys mentioned the specificity of it.
Yeah. And being concise is important. Like, be specific, but be concise, because if you are trying to reach out to somebody who's in a leadership role, chances are good they're very busy. So.
One of the things that you learn in marketing and advertising is that people don't read. And I'm not, saying that the women you're reaching out to won't read what you're posting, but it's important because everyone's moving so fast that they just don't read. So get to the point in that first sentence, or the headline, or, just TLDR. I'm sure many people listening to this have heard that before, but too long, don't read, or didn't read. Like that is the crux of every email you send, every, proposal you write, get to the point in that first sentence and then tell the story of what you're trying to tell after that. Like, if you've got a question to ask it right away. Don't wait till a paragraph or two later to ask the question. Just little tips, that help get through to somebody if you want to reach out to them.
That's gold.
Yeah. Took a while for me to learn those. I was a wordsmith.
Yeah. Right, Erin, this was so much fun. Anu, thank you for having us or inviting us to be on this platform. This is
Absolutely. This is just the beginning, ladies. We're going to do this and dive deeper, and really grateful that you all could make it today and sharing your wisdom with us.
Great. Awesome. Well, and thank you so much for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Same.
Awesome. All right. Well, wonderful. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.